Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call this May 7th meeting of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority Board to order at 9:04 a.m. Mr. Tejas, is there any public comment today?
We've not received any.
Thank you. Next item, I'm sure members of the board, next item is adoption of the minutes for our board meeting of April 8th, 2015. Any comments or amendments? We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any against? Motion passes. Number 4 is discussion and action on a board resolution establishing scoring criteria and authorizing the issuance of a request for proposals for the infrastructure component of the El Paso streetcar project. Mr. Tejas?
Good morning. Raymond Tejas, Executive Director of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority. So today I have a PowerPoint on this.
Your mic is not engaged.
Okay. There we go.
Okay.
All right. Good morning. Raymond Tejas, Executive Director of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority. So what I thought I'd do, and actually, as you all will recall, this item was deleted from the last agenda pending the delivery of some information, some additional information to you all, which we provided, I believe, last week, if not the week before. Anyhow, so what I thought I'd do, I'd go through some of the slides that we presented last week just as a brief refresher, and then we'd get into the discussion on this. So what we're talking about here under item number 4 is the scoring criteria and the authorization to issue the request for proposals on the infrastructure component of the streetcar project. So what we will be talking about include 4 areas: the procurement timeline, which has been revised, the proposed scoring criteria, the reasoning for the proposed scoring criteria, and then finally the requested board action. So here's what the timeline looks like. Of course, back in January, we issued the RFQ. In February, proposals were received for the RFQ. By March, the board had identified the contractor shortlist, which included 4 out of the 6 originally interested parties. And in hopefully today, we'll receive RFP scoring criteria, will be approved by the board, with the RFP to be issued in May or June of this year. And these are obviously tentative, with proposals being submitted to the RMA in June or July of this year. In summer, I'd like to be back to you all with a proposed best value provider. Mid to late 2016, maintenance facility is substantially complete. Mid to late 17, rail and guideway is substantially complete. So that's roughly the timeline. Now you'll remember this. We have not changed this slide. The proposed scoring criteria remains at an 80-20. Of course, that's my recommendation, and of course that's why this is back to you all again for discussion. That really includes three steps. First is a pass-fail, and that will, as we discussed, and I should skip through most of this since we spent some time on this at the last board meeting. But generally, there's a pass-fail review component before any proposals are actually reviewed for price or technical. This is a best value procurement, not a low bid. So these are the areas that will be reviewed under pass-fail. Those are the key elements. And again, this was presented to you last month, so I'll skip through this. Price, of course, is evident. And these are the technical proposal elements that will be evaluated. So these are the newer slides. I think from last month, the questions that were being raised were really, why is the proposed scoring criteria so heavily weighted towards price? So 4 points here. Professional qualifications were the sole focus of the extensive first step of the procurement, which was the RFQ. In fact, the RFQ is entirely a qualifications-based process. So we looked at the proposed team members and the experience on similar projects. The RFQ resulted in the shortlisting of 4 teams that have each been deemed as qualified and able to successfully complete the project. And the inclusion of an additional technical review in the RFP stage was really only intended as a way to provide a bit of an edge to a truly exceptional RFP response. It was not intended to be a second technical evaluation. So heavily weighing a second technical review is counter to the intent of a 2-step procurement, which includes the RFQ, which is the qualifications-based component, and the RFP, which is the proposal. So available project funds are very limited. And this is really the key, in my opinion. For such a complex project with two distinct procurement components, we don't have another bucket of money. There are no additional funds available to us. So we really have to stay within the total project budget. Project stakeholders have consistently stated that no additional funds will be made available. And this, I think, is the key here. Increases in the technical percentage against the price percentage, which are currently being proposed at 20 for technical and 80 for price. Increases in the technical result in increased exposure to a potential higher infrastructure price. And that's the real concern that I'm focused on. I also believe the 80-20 ratio allows for a truly exceptional technical proposal to gain an edge, while without exposing the RMA to the risk of an overly burdensome price increase. And lastly, financial constraints coupled with the RFQ process allow the 80-20 ratio to provide the best value to the RMA. So those are, and obviously these last two slides, the reasoning for proposed scoring criteria, why we're here discussing this item again. My recommendation is again to go with the 80-20. So if in either event, though, there are two requested board action items. One is to adopt the selection criteria and scoring. My preference would be as enumerated within this presentation for the infrastructure component. Then the second motion would be to authorize the executive director to issue the request for proposals once it's ready, and all associated documents and instruments as they relate to the infrastructure component.
We're going to have a discussion, Mr. Tejas, but can we take both items under one motion? Or
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Certainly. And in fact, the board resolution is drafted as a single.
Alrighty.
So with that, obviously I'd open it up to questions from the board. We also have Mr. Chuck Berry with us here, who's the project manager for the El Paso streetcar project under the URS team. And incidentally, we have Brian Cassidy, outside attorney, here with us should you have any legal questions as well.
Members of the board, questions? Comments? Mr. Carlsberg?
Yes, I think I'm the one that initiated this particular item. And the reason being, as both an engineer and a contractor, we see a lot of CSP requests for qualifications proposals. And this is the first time I had seen one with an 80-20 split. And reviewing some that we've been on recently, they range anywhere from 50-50 to 60-40. So it was a little surprising to see the heavy emphasis on price and not as much emphasis on technical because of the difficulty of the corridor that this facility is going to be built in. And I did review the information that we got as a result of last meeting and URS's explanation. And I have to admit that if the consultant and the RMA previously has had favorable outcomes with this approach, I don't really have any objection to it. There's two points I'd like to make. One is, we live in an environment where every project has budgetary limitations. It's no different with us at the RMA than any other entity. The way the system works is the consulting engineer is obligated to produce a design that would fit well within that budget. I do that in my practice all the time. And when we run up against issues during design where we start getting an indication that there may not be funds to build everything that the client wants, and we have to have that conversation saying, we do not think that you can build this project for that, so we would have to talk to them about changing the scope. That's always there. Nobody wants to do it. The second thing that I would like to mention too is that the relationship we have with our consultant is important, and it's important, and we'll be discussing that in another item going forward as to where the construction administration, construction management of this project goes once it's under contract. How much is the consulting engineer obligated for, And that's pretty standard in the disciplines. So with that said, I'm a little reluctant to go against the consultant's recommendation because we have to live with them throughout the project. And if we get to a point with this analysis that we really don't fit the budget, then it's incumbent on them to go back and redesign and get it within scope, and I would assume at their cost. If we start changing things, then we get into some areas that might be a little fuzzy, but that's just my overview. That's a general overview.
I would just add that I'm very comfortable with the process because we've already vetted the companies that are in the pool now, and so we've already done that technical side of it in a very extensive way, and so now we're really looking at primarily price. I would move that we approve the two proposals. I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? There being none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any against? Motions pass. Mr. Tejas?
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I think it helped us, and I think we had a very healthy discussion. And I think the board's cognizant of different factors, and I think it was a good education process for us.
Absolutely.
Item number 5 is discussion and action on the provision of construction management services as required for the El Paso streetcar project.
Okay, so I'm going to be up here at the podium for a bit longer. So item number 5 then deals specifically with the construction management of the project. So if I could ask for the PowerPoint to be brought up, and we can start on that one. And let me, while it's being brought up, I'll take us back. So last month, a very similar PowerPoint was presented to the board as well. It was postponed so that the board could think through the options that were presented at that time. This PowerPoint was presented or was posted online earlier, so the board has had some additional time to review this one. What we're going to be talking about under this particular item includes the background, project background, the options available, the prior board discussions, and the staff recommendation. So these slides, very similar to the last item, you've seen these slides before. The City of El Paso procured URS and assigned the URS agreement to the RMA. There are 3 main phases. This is slightly revised. There's the preliminary engineering environmental, which was completed by URS, the design and bidding component, which is in progress by URS. Then there's the last area, which includes construction testing and the opening. So that's really what we're talking about today. So the options available, as we discussed last month, are issue a procurement, continue with URS, utilize the RMA's general engineering consultant. What we discussed at the last board meeting was a blended approach. And the board asked for additional detail on how such a blended approach could be utilized to take advantage of the value of URS's prior involvement and, of course, the independence of the general engineering consultant. And really, as a reminder, what we were talking about was the fact that because URS has been involved in the project since its inception, they've got a tremendous amount of knowledge about the project, and it would be really helpful to have them stay involved in the project. However, because they are also the designer of record, I felt like there needs to be some independence, at least in terms of the construction management component of the project. So after the April 8th board meeting, a meeting was held between myself and representatives of URS and the general engineering consultant to discuss the potential approaches so that we could come back to you all with this, which is really what we did was we broke out the main components of the remaining project tasks. And what we're looking at right now is that URS would remain as a program manager, which would include the design services during construction, the vehicle rehabilitation oversight, the implementation and operation plan development, and also the public relations component. That would leave then the general engineering consultant as the construction manager, so they're managing all of the infrastructure construction components. That way, if there's an issue with the design, you have an independent engineering firm through our GEC advising us on that component as opposed to the actual designer of record. So this is the proposed approach that we're looking at. Now, we have not, obviously, part of what I'm asking for you, in fact, if I go to the next slide, This is the recommendation for a board action. I'm asking for authorization to negotiate agreements with URS and our general engineering consultant to provide those project management services necessary for the project. So the important part, obviously, is that the negotiated agreements would come back to you all for review and approval. So with that in mind, this is what we're looking at right now, this slide here, the proposed approach. However, we have another meeting scheduled that if the board approves this item, then I would sit down with URS and Atkins this afternoon and hopefully start to work out the actual specifics of it. And perhaps, like by way of example, public relations, that's an item that is, in my mind, is still up in the air in terms of where it ought to be housed. That might be an area that could go under the construction manager, since the construction manager is so heavily involved in the day-to-day construction, so maybe public relations should be under them. In other words, the point is, this is the proposed approach, but once we sit down in the afternoon, I'd like to really get into the details with them, provided that you all provide me with that authorization to do so. And then I would come back to you with a very clearly delineated roles for each entity. So that's what I have to you, subject to your questions.
Ms. Heener?
Thank you. Chairman, thanks for that presentation. As I was looking through the material, there's one thing that stuck out to me that I need clarification on. I was looking at a list where Atkins provided the project they've worked on, and one of the ones they identified was the streetcar. Are they somehow at any point have already been working on the streetcar or a sub-consultant on this? Because we're talking about wanting to have an independent party. I just want to make sure that's what we're getting, and I wasn't understanding why Atkins has listed that project as one of their projects that they've worked on a different item.
I don't think that. Oh, it was identified as a potential project.
Okay, so they haven't had any participation in the
No,
design or any of that?
No, ma'am. And that's the value that they bring, is that independence. They have not been involved in the streetcar to date.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any additional questions? I have a question, Mr. Tejas.
Yes, sir.
Maybe a little too simple, but okay, I don't have a problem with the proposed approach, but who's in charge?
Right. So the program manager is ultimately in charge. However, these would in effect serve as direct reports to me and then ultimately to you. So the real answer is you always, right? So the board is always in charge. Under them is the executive director position, and then in this particular project you would have the construction manager reporting directly to me, and then the program manager reporting to me as well.
Oh, I wasn't talking about our authority. I was talking about, okay, you have URS handling a portion, the general engineering consultant handling a portion. I anticipate there will be problems, as there always has been, working downtown. So my concern is that you end up having to play King Solomon in this exercise and mitigate any conflicts, potential conflicts that could arise through this process, which I envision there will be a few. I think the board is going to share my concern a little bit that I think one entity needs to have overall management of the project, and it's just my opinion, I'm not speaking for the board, that our general engineering consultant should be managing the project and managing the program manager reporting to you. That's just my opinion, but
Okay.
I'd like to hear from my fellow board members on any comments to that effect.
I do have another
Ms.
question
Henier?
that I guess I'm struggling a little bit with why, and I think maybe you touched upon this, Raymond, if we want a third-party independent review, and I understand Atkins does a tremendous job, is there some reason we're not putting this out for an RFP to really give other firms an opportunity to oversee this work? I agree with you, Joe, that I think it's important that there's been the lead there, and the lead needs to be the independent third party. But I guess I just want some more information as to why we're going with our, existing engineer rather than putting out for proposals and out to other people. Since
Our discussions initially were because of the time and the effort extended, since we already have a contract with our general engineering consultant to handle most items for us, and URS had already been engaged by the city extensively to design the project, that time is of the essence here. And if we don't have a huge staff, I think there would be a tremendous delay in the project to create an RFP. That was the discussion and how we got to this point, Ms. Henier. So I'm not saying that that's the right one. I'm saying that that's how we got this in the interest of going forward and saving some time and some money, because it is expensive to put another RFP together. We have the resources identified, so now we just have to go forward and determine how we use them.
I think that's right, and I apologize. It was one of the slides that I removed because we discussed it at the last month's meeting, so I apologize. But the gist of it is that when this was originally envisioned by the City of El Paso, they brought on URS to handle all of it. Now, of course, the city is a little bit different than us. They've got an engineering department in-house where they can do a lot of that oversight that would be required. So we essentially use our in-house as well, which is the general engineering consultant. So we're acting as the city. However, because we don't have an engineering department, we use our general engineering consultant. But ultimately, though, it became an issue of time and effort and cost because we are so far into the process. And there were some prior discussions about who would do the construction management component. And at the time, the board was concerned about hiring out, or should we, and they similar to what we're talking about today. So anyhow, the long and short of it is it's time and money. And the GEC was procured with the intent that they handle any and every engineering service that comes to us.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Findenbach?
Again, I also had the same concern earlier, but it is now my understanding, I think you just confirmed, that this is within the scope of the kinds of work that we have already contracted with our GEC to do. So for that reason, I don't think that there's, unless you disagree, a reason at this point to go out for an additional procurement.
No, in fact, my recommendation from the last board meeting was through the three options that we have, if you recall, we could issue a procurement. We could continue with URS as handling it all, and then we could utilize the GEC. My recommendation last month and remains this month is actually to go after a blended approach to take advantage of the fact that we've already done a procurement for the GEC to handle any and every type of activity like this that we run into. So we already have that on board. One of the other areas we touched on last month as well was the fact that we have a pre-qualified list of engineering firms on board already. The issue with that pre-qual list is that it was really intended to handle very generic roadway projects like the projects that we're developing for the comprehensive mobility plan for the county. It wasn't intended to capture construction management for a project as unique as this. So it really didn't fit within that pre-qual process either. So I do recommend this blended approach based on the time and effort that would be required of a new procurement.
Are there any other questions from members of the board? Someone want to make a motion? We have a motion and a second. There being no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Any against? Motion passes, Mr. Tejas.
Thank you.
Item number 6 is update, discussion, and action on board resolutions authorizing the execution of the following items as they relate to the operation and maintenance of the Tornillo Guadalupe Port of Entry toll facility.
If I could ask you to read in items A, B, and C, and we'll handle them all together.
Okay, item A is an interlocal agreement with El Paso County. Item B is work authorization number 25 with Atkins North America Incorporated as the CRRMA's general engineering consultant. And item C, a change order to Telvent USA LLC as the CRRMA's system integrator.
Thank you. So this item, as was read into the record, deals specifically with the Tornillo Guadalupe Port of Entry. So I thought what I would do here is provide some background for the board. We're going to talk about prior RMA and county actions. We're going to talk about proposed management agreement terms and requested board action. In fact, what I should probably do is take a step back and speak a little more globally about what we're doing here. As many of you may recall, the RMA began discussions with the County of El Paso back in 2014. The idea was the county was getting closer and closer to the opening of the Tornillo Guadalupe Port of Entry, and they hadn't yet figured out exactly what they were going to do with it. Were they going to create a new department within the county to run operations? In fact, actually prior to that, they hadn't really thought through exactly how they wanted to develop their toll collection system. So we spoke with them and offered our expertise and our consultants and our integrator and our general engineering consultant said, this is what we do. Is there a way for us to help you develop your toll collection system? We can plan, design, install, and in fact, we could even operate it for you. So we began those conversations back in 2014. So by May of 2014, the RMA and the county had entered into an agreement whereby the RMA was tasked with planning, designing, installing, and testing the toll collection system for the Tornillo Guadalupe Port of Entry. And we specifically used our integrator who planned and designed and installed the toll collection system for Cesar Chavez for us, and is working on an agreement for us that you'll see hopefully in the next month or two for the Border West Expressway project as well. That integrator has now designed and installed the toll collection system for Tornillo Guadalupe. So that is in place now, based on the agreement from May of 2014. At that same time, we agreed with the county that we would begin negotiating the potential for the RMA to actually operate the facility once it comes online. So in February of this year, the RMA presented, and this was myself along with our vice chair, we presented a proposal to the County Commissioners Court regarding an operations approach for the Port of Entry. The intent was to lay out an approach where the RMA would handle day-to-day operations in coordination with the county. So at that February meeting, the Commissioners Court authorized county staff to negotiate an agreement with the RMA. And in fact, this past Monday at Commissioners Court, the agreement was actually approved. And it's the same agreement that you have in your backup that was provided to you last week. So I thought what I do here is we've got about 3 or 4 slides that are going to look at the proposed management agreement terms specifically. So the RMA role will be day-to-day operations. So that includes the staffing, the toll collection system operation, the security and reporting aspects related to those operations. The RMA, though, specifically would actually utilize the City of El Paso's Bridge Division staffing. We would utilize our general engineering consultant and our integrator teams to actually operate the facility. Very similar to what we do with the Chavez managed lane operation, except that in obviously with Chavez, there are no toll booths, so we have no staffing component that we do in this one. The City of El Paso has been working with us closely, specifically the Bridge Division and the City Manager's Office have been working very closely with us on this proposal, as the intent was really to utilize and cross-train the City of El Paso's bridge staff on the new system that's being implemented, or that is in place at Tornillo. So the idea is the technology at Tornillo at some point in the future will likely be, or could be implemented at the City of El Paso bridges. The City of El Paso staffing would already be cross-trained, and best practices and everything that we implement at Tornillo could then flow freely back and forth with the City of El Paso. So I think they see value in it, and we've been discussing with them how we would actually work it out. We've got staffing plans and that sort of thing ready to go. Assuming, or in the event that you all approve this particular management agreement, then we would take the terms of this agreement, flip it into an agreement between the City of El Paso and the RMA, and I hopefully would be back to you all in June with a similar agreement that would actually give us access to the City of El Paso's bridge staff. So that's the goal there. The county retains certain responsibilities as well, including the general IT requirements, so desktops, network, that sort of thing. They would keep, and certain facility requirements, maintenance of their facility would remain in their hands as well. And then they would, of course, keep the setting of the toll rates and the policies, because in fact it is their facility. So they would set the toll rates, we would manage and operate the facility for them. Now, I'm obviously speaking very generally. You have the agreement as part of your backup, and specifically the exhibits break out exactly the roles and responsibilities of the parties. And we can certainly get into any level of detail that you're interested in. We have today with us Greg Blake from our general engineering consultant team, who was heavily involved in the negotiation of the terms and worked out a lot of these details with us. So he's our subject matter expert today. Here's an estimated timeline. We're hoping for a notice to proceed by the county in mid-June of this year, so next month. That's all based on an estimated opening of the facility in October 2015. Now, obviously, this is dependent upon the federal governments of the U.S. and Mexico finishing all of the tasks they've got to do, but October is apparently the date that everyone is shooting for. So when you look for an October opening date, then you back up from there. And it works out so that on June 15th, if we receive the notice to proceed, 60 days from that notice to proceed, we would be opening without tolls, so kind of a test period. 90 days from that notice to proceed, we would have a soft opening, which is, in effect, we wouldn't be publicizing, but we would be collecting tolls at that point. And 120 days from that notice to proceed, we would actually have like a very similar to a grand opening. The operations budget available to the RMA pursuant to the management agreement would allow for an amount up to $500,000 in fiscal year 15. That's basically from now through the end of September. Now, we're using the county's fiscal year as opposed to the RMA's because it is their facility, so it's a little bit unique. I'll have to keep that straight. But $500,000 through the end of this year, which includes a unique area where we would actually develop a traffic and revenue study, which would help the county identify who its potential users are, which would obviously would help them in their media and outreach efforts. So there are some additional items that are included in the original fiscal year 15 budget that don't pass forward into the fiscal year 16 and 17. Anyhow, fiscal year 16 budget is identified there as $1.4 million, and then thereafter, fiscal year 17 and beyond, we would become part of the county's budgeting process, and we would identify the needs and requirements of the department. However, we have built in a provision in there that says the budget would not be reduced. It's actually based on the fiscal year 15, fiscal year 16 budget with an increase based on CPI, and that's the base point, so it would never be lower than that, so that protects the RMA. Now, of course, we have the ability to terminate as well, but that provides us an additional level of comfort. Here are the term and termination provisions. The term is through September 30th of 2016 with automatic annual renewals thereafter. Now, either party can terminate without cause, but we did build in 120 days from written notice, and that was really for the benefit of the county, because what the services that we will be providing, they'll have to replace, and that's not. These are very specific technical areas of expertise. By way of example, the integrator and that sort of thing. So they'll need time. If for example, for some reason the RMA wanted to leave this arrangement, they would need time to go out and procure those services. So that's what that 120 days does for them. We also have a termination for cause provision built in, which allows 30 days to cure, and that's 30 days from written notice. So we do have the ability to terminate this agreement, of course. The invoicing process is outlined there. Monthly invoices based on work performed would go to the county. The county payment would be due to us within 30 days of receipt in any undisputed invoicing. I will mention, though, that we've developed a good working relationship with the County of El Paso through the design and implementation of the toll collection system. So what we're actually doing now is when we have an invoice, we're actually doing pre-reviews with the county in advance of their actual receipt. So when they receive it, they're not keeping it the full 30 days. So it's really helped to expedite the payment of the integrator and the general engineering consultant, which has been, I think, very helpful. In the event there are any disputed invoices, the Public Works Director would sit down with myself, and we would negotiate any of those disputed invoices. The remaining portions of the invoices could then be paid with disputed areas being left for additional negotiation. So the motions, the actual board actions that I'll be asking of you, and this PowerPoint obviously is focused on the interlocal with the County of El Paso, but I should have mentioned in here that the interlocal is just one component. That's the relationship between the RMA and the County of El Paso. In addition to that, for the RMA to actually provide those services that we are offering to them through the management agreement, we will need a work authorization with the general engineering consultant to handle all of the true day-to-day operations, the management of the City of El Paso staffing, the reporting duties, all of the activities that they provide to us for Cesar Chavez. We would need to engage them through a work authorization, and you have that in your backup as item 6B. And then the last item is a change order to Telvent USA. Telvent is the integrator for us. They are the firm that actually planned, design, and install the toll collection system, and they would do the ongoing maintenance going forward, just as they do the ongoing maintenance for us on Cesar Chavez. So we would need all three instruments to move forward. Now, I mentioned also there is a fourth agreement that is in the works, and that is the City of El Paso and the RMA agreement that would actually provide us access to the bridge division staff. But as far as today, We've got 3 items before you. That's item 6A, B, and C. The interlocal agreement, and what I'm asking for is authorization of the execution of those instruments. And one other final note of interest, the interlocal, I'm asking for authorization for the vice chair to execute that because the interlocal is signed by the county judge. So by way of protocol, the policy position here, which is the vice chair, would sign that agreement. The remaining agreements, the work authorization and the change order, would be executed by the executive director. So that's, I believe, all I have for you on this one, subject to your questions. And again, we have an individual from our general engineering consultant here available to you if you have any specific technical questions.
Questions, anyone?
Just, can you just clarify the budget periods again? Because I know we're using their fiscal year end, so I'm looking at the agreement. And so, can you just explain the
Sure.
2014, 2015, so the 500,000 covers 4 months?
Correct.
And that's what, September, October, November, December?
No, that covers us from, it covers us from execution, because there are certain things that we're going to have to start doing now.
Right.
It covers us, or I should say, really, the notice to proceed, right? So whenever they authorize the notice to proceed, it covers us from that period, which is currently anticipated as June 15th, through the end of the county's fiscal year, which is the end of September,
Okay.
right? So June through September 30, I guess, is the end of September.
Okay,
So that would be that
just to make sure we
first.
had funding right now for the work that we're doing right now.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
thank you.
And then thereafter, October 1 through the end of
Then we
September,
get to the million.
exactly 1.4 million for that.
Okay.
In 17, it would be 1.4 plus the CPI component would be the base point, and we would be involved in the county's budgeting process to say, in the event that we wanted to do improvements, or I should say the county was interested in improvements, they could add budget from there.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Crozer?
I guess I just have one question. Since we're doing this work for the county, how much is the RMA going to make on this deal? In other words, we are, I'm assuming, getting paid for our services and the portion of the staff and costs that the RMA bears independently.
Yes, sir. We have built in one of your exhibits, in the Exhibit C, which is the budget. We have built in legal expenses in the amount of $10,000 and administrative expenses in the amount of $25,000 on an annual basis.
On an annual basis?
Yes, sir.
That seems kind of low for the efforts going to be required.
Well, this agreement was really intended to be a pass-through. So all of remember, the general engineering consultant services, the integrator services, all of those are passed through entirely to the county. So we're not paying for any of that. The $25,000 is simply for my time in terms of oversight. The City of El Paso is the same way. Any invoicing charge from the City of El Paso to the RMA is passed 100% to the county.
Well, thank you.
Ms. Hiner?
Raymond, in looking at these amendments to these consultants agreements, are you incorporating the terms of the county agreement into their agreements? Because essentially it's a pass-through, and so we want to know that those consultants are ultimately responsible for what's happening, what the obligations are. Again, we're getting $25,000. I don't want us left holding the bag. I didn't see that, but I've never seen the original agreement, so perhaps it's in there. And is there some kind of indemnity provision that's being provided?
Well, so let's start with indemnity. Because we're both public agencies, you'll recall the indemnity.
I mean the consultant to the RMA.
It's been some time since I've reviewed them. In the master, okay, so the relationship that we have with our general engineering consultant includes one master agreement, and then from there flow all of the individual work authorizations. This is work authorization number 25. Built into the master agreement is that indemnity.
Okay. And you've incorporated by reference this agreement in terms of they're really responsible. It's a pass-through. We're getting a small fee. Just want to make sure that's clear in the documentation.
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any additional questions? Mr. Tejas? Mr. Carlsberg?
Just one more. And again, I'm a little new on the board and don't have the history of how the board and how the regional mobility authority works. The fees that we're charging on top of everything else, those will compensate us for every cost that we have,
Yes, sir.
and so we're not going to exceed those internally.
No, sir.
Okay.
No. And it was built so that this would be no impact to the RMA.
Okay. Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Tejas, do we need a separate motion for each item, or can we take them in total?
I think you could take them, I'd ask that you take them independently, actually, because they are separate resolutions by entity.
Okay, there being no further questions, I'll entertain a motion to execute the interlocal agreement with El Paso County for the Tornillo Guadalupe Port of Entry toll facility.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any against? Okay, item B, a motion for work authorization number 25 with Atkins North America as the CRRMA's general engineering consultant for the Tornillo Guadalupe Port of Entry toll facility.
Move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any against? Motion passes. And finally, a change order to Telvent USA LLC as the CRRMA's system integrator for the Tornillo Guadalupe Port of Entry toll facility.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any against? Motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Tejas. I think we'll go into, I know we're going to go into the workshop items that we planned and posted. Item number 7 is the presentation, discussion, and action on the duties of the CRRMA's Executive Director. Mr. Tejas.
All right, thank you. So I was asked to develop a workshop of sorts. As many of you all are newer to the board, the intent really was to identify the main I guess, service providers to the RMA, including the duties and responsibilities of your executive director. So what we've got under 7, 8, 9, and 10 is PowerPoints by each of the main entities that serve you all. So item 7 is the executive director. This is a little bit awkward for me, but bear with me, right? I'm going to be doing a lot of discussion about me and what I do. But anyhow, so what we'll talk about include 3 main areas. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about myself, the sampling of duties, including all of those listed there, and of course we'll open it to questions. And this is intended to be more of a workshop, very informal, so please stop me as we go through this, and we can go into any level of detail that you're interested in. I'll mention too, this one's intended to be somewhat brief, so there are areas that I obviously am going to miss. So if you want to talk about any of those, please stop me as we go through this. And I'll mention too, items 7, 8, 9, and 10 were all posted as discussion and action items. So if there's any direction of the board, obviously you have that ability to take action on these. So here's a little bit of background about myself. Back when the city of El Paso was interested in developing, or were really interested in learning about regional mobility authorities, I was with the city attorney's office at that time, and I had most of the transportation divisions, including Sun Metro and the airport, and I had engineering at that time, I believe, as well. So I was the attorney that was tasked with looking into the statutory requirements for the development of a regional mobility authority. I eventually helped to develop the petition to create the RMA and went to the Transportation Commission and secured that authority and developed the resolution that actually created the RMA and named its initial board. Subsequent to that, I was actually getting ready to leave employment of the city of El Paso, but in August of 2008, the then RMA board asked if I would serve as its initial executive director. And the intent there really was that we were on the the RMA was on the verge of implementing the 2008 Comprehensive Mobility Plan, and they wanted somebody to lead the charge on that. So that was really the main task identified for an executive director at that time. Technically, I am a City of El Paso employee, and this follows the model that the city has used with the employees of the Metropolitan Planning Organization as well as the water utility, where the employees are technically the City of El Paso employees. They receive payments, or I should say salary and benefits from the City of El Paso. However, the employment agreement that I have with the city manager of the City of El Paso actually says that my sole duty is to provide services to the RMA. And in fact, there's a management agreement between the RMA and the City of El Paso that says the city will provide the executive director, but that the RMA identifies compensation and actually reimburses the city at 100% for that compensation. And of course, by virtue of that, also retains the ability to hire and fire the executive director as opposed to the city. So I don't work for the City of El Paso, even though technically my agreement is with the City of El Paso, and I am a City of El Paso employee. So it's a bit unique there, but not so unique in that the MPO and the water utility are the same model. So I do, as I mentioned, I serve at the pleasure of the RMA board. All of the terms built into the employment agreement that I have with the City of El Paso were actually developed by the board. So I've mentioned that the city pays the salary and benefits with 100% reimbursement by the RMA. So here are a sampling of duties. And really what I've done here is I've tried to break out the main responsibilities of the executive director into general areas, and I'll try to focus in on those. And as I mentioned before, I'm trying to be somewhat brief, so there are obviously other duties that aren't explicitly named here, but there are general administration duties that I provide for this board, and that includes maintaining all the public records. I am, by policy, the identified records custodian for the RMA. That means that I've got to keep all of the documents in order and available for posterity, I guess you should say. I prepare the annual budget for the board's review and approval each year. I manage all financial transactions, and this is an interesting one because the city actually serves as a fiscal agent to the RMA. So what that really means is they manage all of our bank accounts, but they can't move a dime unless and until I actually provide direction to them to do that. So I coordinate very closely with the City of El Paso, and actually what we've done, and many of you all will remember this from the last audit that we went through, we've hired an outside CPA firm here locally, Peña Briones, to provide that liaison work between my directions to the city and making sure that they've booked all of the payments appropriately. So I manage all of that. I manage all of the debt issuances, so that includes the trustees that we have for our bond issuances, as well as the paying agent that we have on our Build America bond, which is a SIB, a State Infrastructure Bank loan. We manage the State Infrastructure Bank loan payments that are due, and also important, the continuing disclosure requirements that are due on all of our bond issuances. I manage those. Obviously, and this is obviously a very important point, I can't do all of this by myself. I rely heavily on our general engineering consultant and our outside attorneys and consultants, including auditors and CPA firms to get the job done. And then lastly, at least under general administration, I help to develop, implement, and maintain all the RMA policies at the direction of the board. So that's under general administration. So for board and committee meetings, then I prepare, coordinate, and post all agendas subject to or in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. So that means every meeting that we have, we post on a board outside as required by the Open Meetings Act. We go above and beyond that minimal requirement in that a lot of the RMAs don't actually post agendas online. We not only do we post our agendas online, we actually have the backup available online as well. So we do a little bit more than some others. Preparing, coordinating, and posting all the backup materials online, as I mentioned, but that includes the minutes, any reports, all of the PowerPoints that you've seen so far today were developed by myself. All of those sorts of things are developed by me for you. I present item briefings and recommendations for any requested board action to you, and I provide advanced briefing to the chair or board members when requested. So, and this goes back to what we discussed at the last board meeting. If you all are interested in sitting down with me prior to a board meeting to discuss any particular item, I'm obviously available to you at any time. Not only obviously for agenda meeting items, but for any matter that you're interested in. So outside consultants, I oversee all of those that we have. I develop, implement, and oversee all of the procurements. Now, obviously, the procurements, as we discussed at the last month, are identified by you all, and the parameters within which our procurements are implemented are developed by you. Excuse me. Once I should say you, the board has selected an outside consultant, including the general engineering consultant, the outside attorneys, the financial advisor, and outside auditors, among others. Once those have been selected and approved by the board, then I manage and oversee all of those agreements. Included in that is obviously review and pay all invoicing from outside consultants. But prior to that, most of our projects are funded by TxDOT, right, through state or federal funds. So that means that we have to develop and submit invoicing to TxDOT, whether it's to TxDOT or, by way of example, the Tornillo toll collection system, where the county of El Paso actually paid for that. So I developed invoicing to the county pays me, and then we pay the consultants. So there's some extra steps there. I develop and submit all of those invoicing to TxDOT, the city and the county, and then eventually pay all of the consultants and vendors. I oversee the outside auditors for our annual audit report, and I manage the outside CPA firm, as I mentioned before, that works with the city as our fiscal agent as well. So that's a sampling of the outside consultants. So community, media, and agency coordination. This one can take some time on occasion, right? So I speak to civic and community organizations. In fact, I just recently got an invitation to a Rotary group later this month that I'll be presenting at. Council members and commissioners regularly, or I shouldn't say regularly, but periodically request updates from the RMA at their community meetings, so I present at those. Lions groups, all sorts of community organizations have requested presentations, so I do those. I respond to all public and media inquiries, and I try to get you all updated on those, because you need to know who I'm talking to and what I'm saying. I think that's important. I respond to all open records requests. I am, by policy, I am the public information officer for the agency as well. And of course, I coordinate with all public agencies. So if we're doing anything with the city or the county, the TxDOT, with the MPO, if we're trying to pull down federal funds from the MPO, I coordinate with all of those agencies. And lastly, an organization known as Team Texas, which is a collection of all of the tolling agencies throughout the state of Texas. The RMA obviously is a member of that organization, and I currently serve as the vice chair of that organization. So that's community, media, and agency coordination in a nutshell. Project development is obviously another very important area for us. In that realm, I secure the available project funding, so that means I'm working with the MPO, I'm working with TxDOT and other agencies, whether it's through the State Infrastructure Bank or directly with the financial arm of TxDOT. We're working on project development agreements, we're working on financial assistance agreements and all that sort of thing. I initiate and start those negotiations, obviously, with the help of the engineers and the attorneys to make sure we're okay. Negotiate all of those project agreements once we have the funding in place. We have project development agreements, we've got outside consultant vendor agreements. All of the agreements that you see before you, I've been involved in some measure, some more so than others, depending on the level of involvement necessary of the GEC or the outside attorneys. I also oversee and manage all of the ongoing RMA projects. So anything that we're building, that we're designing, that sort of thing, I receive regular public updates, or I receive regular updates so that I can provide that information to you upon your request. A good example of this includes the Airway project, which we recently finished. We had, by the end of it, we were meeting weekly with the project team, including our general engineering consultant, project manager, and the construction team, to make sure that everything was on target and we weren't going to miss our dates. So that's the sort of involvement that I get into. Make sure, and it's obviously I'm not out there measuring or anything like that, right? I'm there to make sure that we're hitting the dates, that if there are issues, I'm hearing about them immediately so that we can resolve them and they don't become a larger issue than they need to be. And of course, I provide project updates and information to the board. And so that's really it. I wanted to focus on a couple of main areas that I'm involved in, but obviously I'm open to your questions at this point.
Is that really it? Is that all of it? There's not more?
That's most of it, I should say.
And other duties as assigned.
That's right. That's
You
right.
skipped that part. Are there any questions of Mr. Tejas? I think it was important that you put that down. We move quickly. Everybody here has other responsibilities, and I think it's easy to lose track sometimes. So I think this workshop is timely, and I'm glad that we got to go over these things so that nobody assumes anything. But I think we're in capable hands with you as our executive director, and appreciate the job that you're doing. I think I speak for the board in that regard, and thank you for going over that with us. If there are no further questions, we will. Ms. Fennenbach, you have a question?
Just a compliment, actually. I just want to say that since I've been on the board now a little over a year, that I think you perform your duties very well, and in terms of your responsiveness to the board when we have questions, it's always immediate and very thoroughly responded to, and your grasp of the complexities of all the projects is clear. So I personally just want to say thank you for what you do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, there being no further comments or actions, we will move to item 8, presentation, discussion, and action on the duties and services provided by Adkins North America Incorporated as the CRRMA's general engineering consultant.
Today we have with us Greg Blake, who will speak to you about the services that the general engineering consultant provides to us.
Thank you, Raymond. Mr. Wardy, you want me to hold off? No, go ahead. Okay. Good morning. I guess it's my turn to be officially placed in the awkward box. I'll talk to you all day long about projects and details and engineering and construction, but you asked me to do this, I get a little bit out of my comfort zone, so bear with me on this one. Raymond had asked that we participate in this workshop, and I think it is timely with the new makeup of the board. So I'm going to cover who we are, and more specifically, some of the individuals that you're likely to see come before you, and who Raymond really deals with on a day-to-day basis, getting these projects developed and out the door and through construction and final acceptance. What services we typically provide to this RMA, and then I'll touch on some of the projects that we have worked on or continue to work on for the RMA, and then some future projects I've listed at the last slide, and then open up to questions. So on this busy slide, what I was trying to convey, if you look on the left-hand side, we have assembled a team of firms to serve as your general engineering consultant. As a GEC to an authority that has broad powers for project development that range from anything from an international crossing with tolling to just a county 2-lane road out in East El Paso County. We have various services we need to tap into. So we've got Atkins and Jacobs with a national bench strength, with tolling expertise and advanced project development and alternative delivery expertise. And we've paired that with several local firms here based in El Paso with ECM, MCI, AIA, Brockenville Steels, Fagan Consulting, CQC, Testing and Engineering, and Lopez Marketing Group. What I'm showing you off to the right-hand side on that map, it's a bit dated. It's probably about 6 months old now. The numbers are probably still fairly close, though. We've got basically about 90 individuals here based in El Paso available to this team. Most of these are transportation professionals. Again, I've mentioned Lopez Marketing Group. They're more of a media outreach, folks that we used on the Cesar Chavez Express toll lanes as we opened that up to tolling. But that's about 90 folks here in El Paso, based in El Paso. And as you go east across the state, we've got about 800 transportation professionals available. If needed, we can bring them in to help out to develop a particular project. Those 90 individuals are in 7 El Paso offices. Those offices are Atkins, ECM, MCI, AIA, Brockenville Steels, CQC, and Lopez Marketing Group. And again, you can stop me at any time if you have questions. I'll field in as we go through. So more specifically who we are, again, I'm Greg Blake. I'm the program manager for this GEC assignment. My duties are typically focused on contractual issues internally with the GEC and externally for the RMA. And what I mean by that, with the internal contractual issues, an example would be the various firms we have within the GEC, negotiating those contracts and getting those team members on board. In particular, an example would be when we run across a specialty item we need on a project like airway interchange. We were out there. Jaime Gallo was the construction manager from ECM here, and they identified asbestos testing need for some of the paint on the bridge structures. So we didn't have that with CQC, our material testing firm, on board. So we identified a firm here locally in El Paso to bring them on board, get the testing done, and not impact that construction schedule. So that's some of the things that get tossed in my court to get those folks on board in a timely fashion. Then helping out with procurements. Raymond mentioned the toll system integration contract that you have currently Telvin on board to do those services. Led the procurement effort for that back in 2012 to get that expertise on board. Interlocal agreements. Raymond spent some time talking about the various agreements that this authority has entered into. Most recently, spent a bit of time working with the county negotiating that agreement for Tornillo Guadalupe Port of Entry. And the day-to-day team management of the various members we have working for you. Based out of El Paso here, David Head in our Atkins office. He's my deputy program manager. I was very happy when he joined the team last September. He's been a great addition. Since then, David has jumped right into the America's Managed Lanes project. That's the extension of the managed lanes from Zaragoza up to I-10. That's currently an outside contractor working directly for you doing the NEPA process, Brown & Gay Consultants. David manages that contract. He's also heavily involved in the 2013 CMP. That's the basket of projects out in El Paso County the RMA is going to develop. And then he'll likely get rolled into Border West Expressway as we get further into the development of that project. David assists me with the day-to-day management of the team members. You're likely to see David come present. He has in the past with a selection recommendation to bring the professionals on board to develop the PS&E for the CMP projects. And then as we get into construction letting for those projects, you'll see David come give progress updates as requested from this board. Touched on Jaime Gallo earlier with ECM here in El Paso. Jaime was the construction manager on the Airway Aesthetics project in an oversight role. So on a day-to-day basis, Jaime was meeting with the contractor, making sure they're meeting their schedule, milestone dates, also assigning resources for inspection, make sure that the contractor is installing and constructing the elements based on the plans and specifications that were issued, and then assigning the material testing folks as needed to make sure we met the contractor schedule, get those items completed. And then on a monthly basis, Jaime would sit with the contractor and go through their pay application and make sure the contractor get paid in a timely fashion. Mike Rudd with Jacobs Engineering, he's our design manager on the team. Mike has been instrumental in getting plans and specifications issued out for America's Interchange, Spur 1966, the Airway project, and actually continues on America's Interchange right now on the last leg of that project. That one dates back to 2009. Mike and myself were involved in the procurement of the design builder. Then as TxDOT found additional funding to complete the interchange, they asked the RMA to get the construction letting documents together. And Mike assembled a team of engineers and designers from AIA, from ECM, Brock & Steels, and internally with Jacobs and Atkins to get those plans and specs out on time for some very expedited construction letting projects. And so Mike has given presentations to the board in the past on progress on those design projects. I think it was last year he presented on America's Interchange and Spur 1966. And Robert Moreno, a recent addition to our team from El Paso here with MCI. We brought MCI on board last year to help out with that last phase of America's Interchange to get the construction plans out. So Robert is going to continue working, MCI and Robert are going to continue working with the GEC. We're looking for Robert to take over that design management role with the CMP projects as we get the consultants working on Eastlake Phase 1, Eastlake Phase 2. We need to have someone that makes sure that design criteria is met with those packages being let out. So that's going to be one of Robert's duties moving forward. You're likely to see him, if the board wants updates on the CMP design progress, we would have Robert come provide those updates to you if requested. And lastly, Ron Fagan. You'll remember Ron provides quarterly updates to the board on the performance of the Cesar Chavez Express toll lanes. That'll likely morph into updates on TGPOE, the Tornillo project, and Border West Express later on when that one comes online. So what we do, these are typical services that we provide to your RMA. I'm not going to read through all 10 of them. What I'd like to highlight are some of the ones I haven't touched on or won't touch on in the project development process. If you look at traffic and revenue studies and feasibility, we typically either handle that within Atkins or within Jacobs. There's a very specialized skill set with traffic and revenue. Jacobs has Phil Usherman on board and a couple other folks in that group within Atkins. Phil had done the traffic and revenue studies on the Cesar Chavez Express toll lanes, actually on America's Managed Lanes when TxDOT was developing that project, as well as Border West Expressway. And Phil's likely going to get engaged on the Tornillo Guadalupe if there's a NTP here soon. The county was interested. They had really never done a formal traffic and revenue study at that facility, so Phil's going to get involved and lead that effort for us. And then construction and design survey, we've got Brock and Bostiels here in El Paso. They also do hydraulics and hydrology for us on the America's Interchange and other design projects we get into. So projects. First one I wanted to highlight was America's Interchange. I've touched on it a bit, but I like to think of it from our involvement from two different phases. The first was back in 2009, pretty much right after we were brought on board as the GEC. America's Interchange was identified as a priority project for this area, and there was the ARA dollars that were allocated to that project that had a very short fuse to be spent. And so looking at the various options with America's Interchange, you had a very aggressive timeline to be able to say those funds from the federal government were obligated. Design Build provided that avenue to get to the obligation of those federal funds. So we went through a procurement effort. Kim Daly from Jacobs led that procurement effort, and day-to-day activities were putting together technical provisions, design criteria, and the contractual terms in the document to show what that risk allocation was between the contractor and the owner on America's Interchange. So that led up to I believe we got the developer on board in the summer of 2010. So at that point, that job transitioned to a actual development. We had the designer and contractor on board at the same time through the design build process. So Kim's role was basically done at that point, and we assigned Pete Jacobs out of the Atkins El Paso office to lead the design build oversight effort. So Pete had a team of engineers and inspectors from Atkins, Jacobs, AIA, ECM, and Brock and Bostiels working on that project on day-to-day, doing the design reviews that the developer was putting together, making sure that met the criteria in the contract, as well as the inspectors out in the field doing the testing and inspection to make sure that it met the plans once we're ready to get in the ground. And I'll also mention that project was a bit unique in that oversight role is a blended approach between the RMA and TxDOT. Pete actually had several TxDOT inspectors working on his team on a daily basis. The second phase of America Interchange is the PS&E for the remaining portions to get to the ultimate configuration. So with the design build, that was the first 3 direct connectors. Now we've chipped away at the rest of that ultimate design through that expedited letting process. And again, that was Mike Rudd leading the charge on that one with a lot of engineers and designers from the firms I've mentioned here in El Paso. The second project I highlight, the Cesar Chavez Express toll lanes. This is the first of its kind here in the region. You've got tolling, but it's on bridges. So this was new for the area to actually have a toll road up and running. So in order to get the first toll road developed in the area, we had to go through a lengthy planning process, get policies in place at the board, toll rates, business rules, all those things had to be handled. Atkins led that effort with Fagan Consulting involved as well. Then we rolled into a toll system procurement. Again, that was Atkins leading that effort. That resulted in bringing an integrator on board at the end of December of 2012. At the same time, well, actually a little bit further down in the project development, as we got closer to opening, there was a public relations effort where we got media involved. We had radio ads, TV ads, and a billboard on I-10 to kind of get the message out. To tell the people, you know, this is what's coming, this is how you use it, this is what's going to cost, this is where it's located, this is the owner, get the key points out to the public. And that was Lopez Marketing Group out of El Paso leading that effort. Performance monitoring, reporting, and ops and maintenance support. What we do there, the toll system integrator, they have a performance-based maintenance contract. And one of the key measurements there, they have to capture 99.96% of all the vehicles going through that lane. They have to capture and create a transaction for that car. So you've got, what is that, four vehicles in 10,000 is their error rate. So one of the things we do with Telvent is we monitor those performance metrics. There's a whole slew of them, but make sure that they're meeting those metrics before we would approve a maintenance payment to them, because they're on a monthly maintenance payment. If those metrics slide, what Telvent has to do, they would have liquidated damages in that contract. They have to go out and replace a camera or replace a loop in the pavement. Whatever piece of equipment is causing that degradation in the road, capturing that transaction, they're on the hook to replace that. So one of the things we do is we monitor that performance-based maintenance contract, as well as provide the financials to this board with the traffic volumes and what that revenue represents at the end of the day. So we're doing that on a quarterly basis right now. And then on the ops side, one of the things there, we've got a lady, Corey Thomason. She used to work for NTTA, but now she's working for Atkins out of our Dallas office. So she's very experienced in the customer relations aspect. One of her jobs at NTTA was making sure they could reconcile all the customer complaints they got on a daily basis. So here what happens, a little less volume than NTTA system. Most of the complaints that get escalated from the back office and can't get resolution end up being an email or a phone call to Raymond, and Raymond turns around and sends it to Corey. And what we strive for there is Corey, within a 24-hour period, is to dig into the details of that transaction. You know, why is there a valid complaint? Get the details of the information and call that customer back and have that dialogue with, well, this is what we see, and get to the root cause of that complaint. And typically, Corey ends up with a satisfied customer, I'd say 99% of the time. She's always getting down to the root cause and getting it resolved. We've actually had, at one case where we had a customer call and leave a voicemail for Raymond gushing about Corey, which is kind of odd when you're thinking about tolling and paying a bill and having an issue. On the back end, to hear someone that's very appreciative of that service was a nice kudos to Corey. The last project I was going to highlight is the 2013 El Paso County CMP. This is the basket of projects we're helping the county develop out on the east side. Back in, I think it was the end of 2013 in December, these projects were identified, and we were tasked with taking a look at them, do the data gathering, find out, you know, what information is available, how far along in the development process are they, put together total project cost estimates, and then what would it take to get it built in the ground and open, create that schedule. So through that process, a lot of stakeholder coordination with TxDOT, the county, and a couple of municipalities. Once that was complete, a development plan was created. There were a lot of agreements that Raymond negotiated with the county and TxDOT to get these projects moving. We assisted in those interlocal agreements, providing the information Raymond needed for project details. We've gone through a consultant procurement. That's the recent activity that ended up in 4 consultant teams being available on the bench to develop these projects from a plan, specification, estimate perspective. So their scope's going to be get it to where we're ready to let that project to construction. So as we roll into that next phase, we're going to have the oversight of those professional services firms to make sure they're meeting the criteria we've established. And then I've asterisked the items in the future. We'll have construction lettings and then construction oversight on those lettings to make sure that those contractors are meeting their requirements per contract. This last slide, I listed a bunch of other projects we've worked on for the authority. And again, I'm not going to go into much detail on a lot of these. I'll just highlight a couple. Zaragoza Interchange and Northeast Main Lanes. Those are two projects where the authority's responsibility was really helping TxDOT find a funding gap and fill that with some additional funds. And they were for specific items of construction on those projects. So we were tasked with overseeing that portion of the work and ensuring that those funds were spent. I think we're talking about aesthetic enhancements on Northeast Main Lanes in Zaragoza, and making sure those funds were spent on those portions of the work, and also making sure that we were providing quarterly updates to the RMA on the construction progress of those projects. So we had Michael Berkelbeck from ECM here in El Paso going out there and meeting with the contractors on a weekly basis to see where they were on that construction progress. He was taking construction progress photos and then taking a look at the contractor's estimate on a monthly basis to see where those funds are being spent. And then any change orders on those items were rolled up and discussed with Mr. Tejas. I've got some on the bottom there, the bike share and streetcar, as you pointed out. Those are ones on the radar right now. We're not currently engaged to work on those. I had plenty of conversations with Raymond and others about the projects, but just things on the horizon that I think we're going to get pulled into potentially. Bike share looks really interesting. It's not something we would typically get involved in. I think what we're going to end up doing there is helping y'all develop an operations plan and see the most efficient way we can get some locals involved to manage that once that thing's up and running. And that's what I had, so I'll open it up to questions at this time.
That's a lot, Mr. Blake.
I'll try to be brief.
Are there any questions for Mr. Blake? Thank you for your, did you have a question?
No, just good job.
Thank you very much. It was a good presentation. There's a lot on the plate there, and very well done, and something for us to be able to refer back to when we have questions for you.
Okay. And I will offer, this is the first time we've done this. We can take you guys when we have a construction project going. We're more than willing if you want to go take a look and get more in the weeds on a particular issue on the construction side, or even during a design project, if you want to sit down and take a look at the different elements we're working through. We're more than happy to do that with you.
I think that's a great idea, and I would really like to visit the Tornillo port of entry, but I think we'll pack a lunch when we go.
Yeah,
So
that's a trip. So thank you.
thank you for a good report. Okay, item number 9, Mr. Tejas, is presentation, discussion, and action on the duties and services provided by Locklord LLP as an outside law firm to the CRRMA.
Okay, today we have Brian Cassidy from the Locklord Law Firm. He's going to provide an update on their services.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, board members. My name is Brian Cassidy. I'm a partner with Locklord. Nice to see some of you again who were here when I was here a couple of weeks ago. I was trying to figure out how I could offer something similar to what Mr. Blake offered you, which was a tour of something interesting. All I could do was show you a bunch of contracts probably and bore the heck out of you. Anyway, Locklord, we bring a very multidisciplinary approach to our work with the CRRMA, and we've had the opportunity and the pleasure to do so since 2008, really since about the time Raymond started. With the RMA, we've kind of been involved with your projects along the way as well. And when I say multidisciplinary, we do a lot of different things, and we'll cover that in some detail, but we're not just, it's not subject matter specific. You do have, outside of the transportation area, you do have folks that do your bond counsel work, and you have some other, I think, outside lawyers that Raymond uses for specific things. But we kind of bring a very varied range of expertise to what you do, but with a specific emphasis on exactly what you do, which is transportation infrastructure development. The firm, we are an international firm. We are among the AmLaw 100 firms, which means we're one of the biggest the 100 firms in the U.S. We recently completed a merger earlier this year, which put us over 1,000 lawyers. We're international in scope, and we've got 23 offices, range of clients from local clients to Fortune 500 and other clients. Having said all of that, our focus is Texas. That's the kind of the core of where the firm grew. Our expansion has been incremental, but really our biggest presence and our biggest dedication of resources is in Texas. With respect to our transportation infrastructure practice, we have the leading practice in the state. We currently represent 7 of the 9 regional mobility authorities, and we've represented the North Texas Tollway Authority for many years. Prior to that, back to the 1950s, the Texas Turnpike Authority, and some interim agencies in between there and what they spun off to be the Dallas assets of the North Texas Tollway Authority. because of that, because of our kind of ongoing involvement, we've been involved in policy development and legislative issues along the way. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. But what that means is we've kind of been on the ground floor as the body of law and the policy and the procedures that govern what you all do on a daily basis, and what Raymond and your GEC and the financial team do in terms of bringing projects to bear. We've kind of been involved from the ground up on the legal and policy development side. We've also been involved with Team Texas. Raymond mentioned he's an officer in that. It's a very valuable organization that kind of brings the toll authorities in the state together to kind of share best practices, to share information, to share resources in certain ways, and figure out how an RMA or a toll authority or a county toll authority in one part of the state is doing things can be of great benefit to how you're doing things here. So it's an organization we kind of helped get off the ground and get started. It was kind of modeled after a similar organization actually in Florida. And we've been around and doing this long enough that when it comes to going to Wall Street, people know who we are in terms of being able to recognize that you've got a firm on your team that is experienced in what they're doing. And I don't mean to overestimate or oversell that, and Richard Ramirez can speak to it a little bit more. You haven't had, other than your vehicle registration fee financing, the need or the opportunity to go sell bonds yet in that sort of, in a toll revenue bond sort of structure. But when you do, the rating agencies and those investors will want to know that the contracts underlying those transactions, the design build agreements or comprehensive development agreement, whatever it is, has been done in a way that is going to properly allocate risk and responsibility, that's going to protect the RMA, so that when they're selling bonds and you're pledging your revenues to secure those bonds, that you're not going to get blindsided as an agency by some sort of unanticipated risk that hasn't been properly shifted. So they're making a safe investment. It helps to bring that credibility to those transactions. Kind of an overview of what we've done. I would break it down. As I said, it's multidisciplinary, but I'd say we kind of focus on three pretty much core areas, and you've heard Raymond and Greg both mention some where there's a lot of overlap. There's very much a team approach to what we do in terms of, or in collaboration with the other team members. Funding is a big part of it. Procurement's a big part of it. And then project development, the actual implementation and project development side is another significant element. So on the funding side, we've worked with financial advisors, with Raymond and others, in trying to access all sorts of different types of funding. And there is, as you can see from the list, there's a pretty wide variety of vehicles that you can access and try and fund your projects. And the more creative you can be, the more money you can have the ability to access. And this RMA really has been very creative, remarkably creative in the way it's done its approach to its project financings. You've used the benefit of a number of the things on this list, not yet a TIFI alone. The last one, the ARA funding, was very important for the Americas Interchange project. That came with a lot of bells and whistles with it. So, you've got financial advisors that kind of help structure, and Richard, again, will talk more about that. But what we do is kind of know the legal ramifications, the policies, the agreements, the documents, the process that you have to follow in order to access those funds. On the procurement side, again, Greg mentioned a number of the projects, and we work very closely with the GEC team. With respect to procurements, they're very much developing the technical specifications and requirements that you want contractors to follow. We're the ones that kind of help with Raymond guide the process, what's required under your procurement policies. You want to be in compliance with those, what's required under state law, what's required under federal law if you have federal funding as part of your projects. So designing a procurement that's in your interest but is fair to the contracting community as well is important, because that goes to the credibility of the agency, and you want people to want to do work for you, so you want a competitive atmosphere. You want them to know it's a fair competitive atmosphere. So we work in trying to make sure that those procurements are structured right. Again, there's a variety of different kinds. Design build, comprehensive development agreements, which you haven't done yet, design bid build, professional services, the toll integrators, and even the GEC themselves and others have been things that we've helped structure the procurements were. We mentioned a contract provision that you have with your GEC earlier. It's important, again, that the contracts that come out of those things are, again, ones that protect the agency. On the project implementation side, this is probably where we actually spend most of our time, and it's probably sometimes the most challenging. TxDOT is a great partner for the RMA. Wouldn't be able to do what you've done without TxDOT. At the same time, TxDOT's across the table, and it's interesting negotiations at times. The project development agreements that Raymond mentioned, we have operating agreements, maintenance agreements, all those with TxDOT. Those are critical to the implementation of projects. And it helps to have worked on these with other agencies, with other projects, because we can bring experience, we can bring relationships, we can bring that knowledge. Doesn't mean that we're not going to have the same level of, what's the right word, spirited negotiations. But at the same time, we know the issues. We know what everybody's trying to get to. We know what the issues, hot button issues are for TxDOT. We know what the issues are that where we particularly need to be watching the RMA's best interest, and so it helps to kind of expedite the process to have had the experience that we've had in doing that, and those are really critical, as I said, to implementing your projects. With third parties, with design build contracts, again, very important to protect the agency, whether you're financing in the markets or not. You still want to allocate risk. You are not TxDOT. You don't have the resources of the state of Texas behind you. You have bank accounts that aren't quite as big. So if there's a problem with a project, if there's cost overruns, you want to make sure that that risk has been appropriately shifted where it's supposed to be so that you're not getting surprised and taking on those obligations without knowing it. We negotiate typically your professional services contracts, interlocal agreements. We've had, again, you've heard about the Tornillo project and others. We've been involved in helping negotiate and design some of those things. Raymond's handled the principal negotiations, obviously, but in terms of what the structure of those agreements look like, kind of, again, some of the issues that need to be addressed, we've worked on those considerably. Again, it's very much a team effort. Outside of those areas, again, with project financings, we work closely with as I've been saying, as a team effort with your GEC, with your bond counsel, with financial advisors, and then handling a number of other things. Raymond mentioned, I think, in his presentation, Public Information Act requests. He's very capable of handling those. What we can do is offer some expertise as to, okay, you've gotten a request for this type of document. This may not be something you're ready to release yet, and here's why. Kind of the industry perspective on why it's important to kind of hold on to things or how to respond to things, and it may just be a timing issue, but you don't want to prejudice the interests of the authority in negotiations with third parties or in the public arena without knowing exactly what you're doing before you go into it. There may be reasons that things shouldn't be released at a time or should be released at a particular time. That's just one example. Another is environmental law. Doesn't happen, doesn't come up, but when it does, environmental issues can be huge. Helps to have that expertise that you've had the depth of experience where you've seen that issue before and know maybe the best way to do it, who to call it EPA, who to call it the state, those types of experience. And then with our pass-through financing transactions and transportation reinvestment zones, TRZs are something we've been very, very involved in with Representative Pickett, really since the origination of that legislation in 2007. We've worked very closely with him in sessions, multiple sessions since then to enhance that legislation, to make it better, to make it easier to apply across the board. We've got an issue right now with county TRZs that you're probably aware of, but we're trying to work with them now how to fix that issue. So again, we've kind of been probably the leading firm in terms of trying to implement the policy side of TRZs, both legislatively and in terms of practice. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the projects because you've heard a lot about them already. Greg did a very good job of overview. We've been involved in a number of them. The Spur 601 project I will mention because it was such an innovative project, the first one out of the box, but it was very creative, really great way to get the RMA off to a very innovative start and kind of really put the underpinnings for some of the financial resources that you continue to have available to you today. The Managed Lanes project, of course, has been, as Greg mentioned, the first toll project in the area, so that was interesting, and again, that involved a lot of interaction with TxDOT. The America's Interchange project I mentioned, again, that was unique also in that the State Infrastructure Bank loan took the form of a Build America bond. Again, kind of a creative way to take advantage of some innovative financing in order to get the best, most affordable financing you could get for the project. Border Highway West was the most probably recent hard negotiation that we've been involved with TxDOT in order to get they granted you a significant amount of money, but with that came a lot of strings attached, and trying to make sure those strings were fair to you was, again, a process that required some time and some effort. And then, of course, we're now in the middle of the streetcar project and working with you all on the procurement side of that. From a legislative standpoint, and maybe this is on my mind because it's legislative season in Austin, but we've been involved in the process really from the start of the RMA legislation. Really, RMAs were first authorized in 2001. They were significantly enhanced and revised in 2003, so some major legislative changes that we were involved in, and since that time we've had some involvement in every legislative session involving RMA issues. And not just as advocates, we do serve as advocates, we do try and advocate for policy changes and legislative changes, and I'll talk about a couple of those unique to you all in a minute. But we also serve as a resource because we've done it so long and because we've got that policy background. A lot of times we're asked both during legislative sessions and during interim hearings to come and just present, just to be a resource on certain issues, TRZs being a good example, but other things as well, RMAs in general. So we've had a heavy hand in staying involved. The legislature is the one that takes actions, but we've had a role and been asked and provided a role in providing input in that process. A couple of specific things from legislative, I mentioned the TRZs. We worked on trying to make sure, I know y'all talked a little bit about the airway aesthetic project. We had to secure a bit of a change in the TRZ legislation in order to make sure that that project qualified, that you could use the funding from the TRZ for that project. So we had to go in into the statute and try and make sure that aesthetic projects, aesthetic improvements, were included in what could be funded with TRZ revenues. Similarly, parking structures. There was some reference to parking in the statute already, but not standalone parking garages, and that's been something that the RMA has expressed an interest in doing, as a standalone parking garage. So we began working with Representative Pickett. We're able to get a change in the RMA statute that specifically authorized the ability to do parking garages. The vehicle registration fee, that's been something you've had the benefit of. There was a previous legislation that gave that to 3 counties. During the last legislation, expanded it to 2 more counties. We were involved in the first 3 counties, so we're able to kind of work with the legislature and with Representative Pickett and Senator Rodriguez's office to try and make sure that you all had the benefit when they expressed that interest during the last legislative session. And we continue to work on those issues right now. This has been a session with a lot of anti-toll sentiment, to be quite honest, and so trying to address that in ways that really, I think that's based on a lot of misunderstanding. It's also based on a lot of local fights that have nothing to do with El Paso. They have a lot to do with Dallas and that area, where people are experiencing toll fatigue, as they like to call it, up there. But then they want to address that issue through statewide legislation that has the effect of impacting you all and others around the state that are trying to do the same sorts of things. And so trying to create that balance or emphasize some balance has been part of our efforts this legislative session. A little bit about the team that were involved. I've been doing this since probably the mid-1990s. Been practicing law for about 30 years, but this has been a big part of my practice for the last, since that period of time. I've worked on projects all around the state. As I said, led our representation of RMAs, of the 7 of the 9 RMAs that currently exist. I manage our Austin office, but if any of you know lawyers, managing them is a total fiction. So I have the title, but that's about it. Brian O'Reilly is probably the lawyer who works with me on the most regular basis. Brian came to us from the Texas legislature, obviously went to law school, but worked in Representative Pickett's office, was the clerk of the House Transportation Committee the last time Chairman Pickett chaired the committee. So again, Brian, we got to know Brian through that process at that period of time. He does great work. He works probably almost on a daily basis, I would say, with Raymond quite a bit. And has really brought a lot of background and expertise from the legislative session and the project side as well. Lori Winland is probably our Public Information Act expert, does a lot of procurement-related work as well. Duke undergrad, Yale Law School, very smart woman, and really does a lot of, again, a lot of the day-to-day work on these projects. And then Kurt Ashmos is a partner with us who leads probably our day-to-day work on the procurement efforts, deeply involved right now in the streetcar procurement issues and working with those. So. With that, that's what we do, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Members of the board, any questions for Mr. Cassidy?
Thank
There's
you.
a lot there, and we appreciate the information. A lot to digest. Thank you for appearing today before us.
I would like to just add one comment. I don't know if this group has seen it yet, but your summary of the legislative actions every year when they're in session is really helpful, and so I appreciate you producing that for us. Good.
Okay. Last and not least, presentation discussion, item 10, presentation discussion and action on the duties and services provided by the First Southwest Company, LLC, as the CRRMA's financial advisor.
Yes, sir. So today we have Richard Ramirez from First Southwest to present.
Good morning, board members. Thank you for having us here. Before I get started, I want to introduce 2 of my colleagues that are also here. Maria Fernandez Urbina, native El Paso. She's been here now 5 years. She's worked for us about 15 years. And then the young man next to her is Corky Hall. Corky's been with us only about 64 years. We serve as financial advisor to other entities in the area, municipalities and political subdivisions, such as the city, the PSV board, the El Paso, ISD, Socorro, Isleta, the hospital district, and many others. So we're intimately involved here in the city of El Paso. I am more recent to the team, and my name is Richard Ramirez. I'm a managing director in the Austin office. The lead contact for you is Wayne Placide. Wayne is in New York pricing a transaction for another client, and I have, now that I'm on the team, I'm happy to be here. I also represent other RMAs, as I'll talk about later. I'm the lead banker for Central Texas RMA, for Northeast Texas RMA, and also for the Hidalgo County RMA. So, as I mentioned, we've been around for a while. Since 1946, our headquarters are in Dallas. We also are a national firm. We have offices in 25 other states, 25 offices around across 14 other states. We're involved in transactions every week, on average 22 deals a week, whether it's on the financial advisory side or whether it's on the underwriting side. As a broker-dealer, we also do underwriting work, but obviously it's limited to those clients where we're not financial advisor on. Public finance is our core business. We're the largest financial advisor, certainly in the state, but also since 2000, from 2010 to 14, if you take number of deals that have been done across the country, we're the #1 financial advisor for those number of deals. We're a registered broker-dealer. We're regulated by the SEC, by FINRA, MSRB. Anybody that can regulate us has a hand in regulating us, and that's become more prominent ever since the credit crisis. Seems like there's a lot of focus on regulation for us. It's been, it's cost us a lot of money, but the good thing is that since we've been regulated from day one, it's been a little easier road for us than maybe other firms. Just at a glance, we got started in Texas, our headquarters in Dallas. So we are by far the largest financial advisor in the state, whether it's number of deals or volume of deals. 400 employees firm-wide, 150 in public finance. And we've also received 15 Deal of the Year awards. This is by the Bond Buyer, which is our industry paper. And one of those is actually was the pass-through financing for you back in, I think it was 2010. Aside from just our financial advisory work, we also, in your case, we are involved with continuing disclosure, and not sure whether we do our rebate, but with our other clients or within public finance, we also have other functions that we can perform. I think continuing disclosure has received the most news lately because it's been a real focus of the SEC. So we've been doing that ever since our firm was formed, or not quite, but for a long time, including asset management of proceeds, pension and OPEB advisory business, and then, as I mentioned to you, the municipal underwriting. But all of these areas is areas that we provide services, but our core business is just purely the financial advisory side of the business. With respect to CRRMA, with respect to you, we have been involved in all of your deals. We've been your financial advisor from inception. I think we have worked on every deal from the initial $233 million pass-through in 2008, and then until the last deal last year, which was the vehicle registration fee. So all of the deals and the SIP loans, I guess the deal of the year was the first one, the pass-through deal in 2008, and then 3 SIP loans since then, and then the VRF. I'm not going to go talk about all the deals since you've already heard them from everybody else. But specifically to you, we also assist you with rating agency presentations, the continuing disclosure, as I mentioned. We help you with the RFP process for underwriters, selecting trustees and printers. We actually help structure any financing for you. Our advice to you is to make sure that you are doing something that's suitable. We more than anybody else, or different from anybody else, we're a fiduciary, so we're an extension of your staff, and everything that we do we have to keep in mind that it's purely in your best interest to execute something or not to. We provide that advice to your staff. think I just spoke about this slide. These other slides are specifics of the deals. Like I said, I'm not going to go through them. This is the one where we had Southwest Region Deal of the Year award from the bond buyer. Again, the vehicle registration fee. We also executed VRF deals, as we call them, for Hidalgo County RMA, and been involved, I guess, with those. There's been 3 in the state. The other one was Cameron County. We're not financial advisors to Cameron County, but the other 2 we are. And so we've executed 2 of the 3 that have been done as the financial advisor. With respect to RMAs, it's a big part of our practice. That's a big part of what I do every day. So we've been involved in every single kind of transaction. Particularly CRRMA has been the busiest. So from TIFIA loans that we were able to obtain in 2005. Currently working right now as we speak. I had a call this morning with TIFIA. We're doing a $265 million loan with TIFIA. We're in the process of negotiating for the Bergstrom Expressway in Austin, and that's an $800 million financing that we hope to execute sometime in September. We've also been involved with the TRZs, as Brian mentioned. And by the way, he's been a good partner to work with. Every time we can't do something or have an issue on financings, we turn to Brian and says, can you fix this, get it fixed at the legislature? So I myself have provided some testimony this session and prior sessions. But he's right, the counties have an issue with the TRZ, so hopefully they'll get fixed, and these other counties that we help form TRZs will also be able to take advantage of leveraging some of those dollars, or just collecting them. With respect to SIB loans, we work with the state, currently working on 2 SIB loans for 2 other RMAs right now. But obviously we've worked on SIB loans for you also. And then lastly, the vehicle registration fee deals that I just mentioned that we also worked on. Just with respect to the team, as I mentioned, Wayne is the lead contact. Myself, I'm second chair, but I'm available anytime that I'm needed here. And then Maria's also been very helpful for us, having a local contact. The other folks, Emily and Stephen, are kind of quant people behind. We have, you see us, but we have so many resources back in Dallas that really provide assistance to us. Any transaction that we do, the underwriters help us to make sure. One of the values I think that we bring to the table is we're in the market so much, we know what a decent rate is, what a good rate is in the market, and we really provide good advice to our clients as to whether they're getting a good deal or not. So that's what I have. I want to thank you for allowing us to be here, for allowing us to be your financial advisor. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions? Thank you very much for your presentation. I'd like to thank those that made presentations today. I think, as you all know from the Dallas Morning News piece that was distributed to our board, there is tremendous scrutiny on the performance of RMAs and the use of funds. I think that we stand out because we have executed some noteworthy projects, unlike some of the other RMAs, and the pressure will be on all of us going forward, and we're going to depend very heavily on our partner organizations to assure that we perform and we do a service as the RMAs were designed to do for our community. So thank you for being here with us today and taking the time to present to us. Mr. Tejas, if there's nothing else on the presentations, I'll move on to item 11.
That's right. I would just like to echo the comments you made. This RMA has been very successful through its several years, and it's largely due in part to the folks that just presented to you. So I'd like to thank them as well.
And we'd like to thank you for your efforts. Item 11 is discussion and action on board resolutions authorizing the executive director to execute the following instruments as they relate to the workshop items noted above. A is a revised engagement letter with the Locklord LLP law firm for the provision of legal services as requested from time to time by the CRRMA, and B, a financial advisory agreement with the First Southwest Company, LLC. Mr. Tejas.
So very briefly, under item 11A, you'll remember this item. This one was deleted a couple months back. Going back in time, I think as Brian Cassidy mentioned to you earlier, the firm of Locke Lord has been an outside attorney to the agency for many years. They have an engagement letter with us since, I believe it was 2008, in fact. The rates there contemplate annual increases, but we never implemented those annual increases. So what you saw a couple months back was a request for an increase of the fees, and I think because they hadn't been increased since the execution of the agreement, it was a little bit shocking to see that type of increase. So what I've asked is that Mr. Cassidy come forward with a couple of slides and provide a little bit more background to the board in terms of how those increases were supposed to have occurred and how they actually did. So with that, I'd ask Mr. Cassidy to approach the podium and share with you some details.
Mr. Tejas, I have one question before Mr. Cassidy makes, no, go ahead, Mr. Cassidy, you can step forward. If those increases were supposed to be instituted, why were they not instituted? I guess that's the question that the board may have. Simple question.
I'd say it's simple oversight. They were just simply never implemented.
Okay.
And I'd say that they weren't mandatory.
And if I might, I think there was also some sensitivity to, there was some lean revenue resources at times.
And still.
Yeah.
But yeah, the fact of the matter is that the RMA was an unfunded agency, and all of our projects were and continue to be funded directly either from TxDOT or the feds or elsewhere. So I'd say he's being generous when he says that there was sensitivity to it. The fact of the matter is that the RMA doesn't have a revenue stream and still, frankly, doesn't. So they've been sensitive to that.
Yeah, I was just going to tell you, we're still technically an unfunded agency, and so
Absolutely.
we're very sensitive to expense and pricing issues. Mr. Cassidy, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. And if I could, I want to go back to just something you said earlier about the Dallas Morning News article. I think that was, it is what it is. I want to commend you for having the presentations you asked for today, because in my experience, the RMAs that are successful and that implement projects are the ones where there's significant board engagement and where there is a good understanding from the board of what the entities are doing, and it really helps. So I want to commend you for that. And as you said, that article wasn't about you guys, and for good reason. Raymond kind of set the stage very well. We haven't increased our rates since 2008, and that's created some difficulties. And as it is, we discount our rates off for our standard hourly rates. We are a large law firm. Our rates are high, and there's little that I can do about that in terms of where we are. What I want to do with these is just present a little bit of information. Mr. Parker asked a question last time about some of the percentage increases, I think, and I've got some of what we'll address, I think, what Mr. Parker asked for, and then I'll explain why I don't have maybe another aspect of his question. When you look at the top chart up there, it refers how we've increased our standard hourly rates since 2008, and you can see some pretty high numbers on that top chart. The bottom chart is representative of what we are proposing to do now in terms of increases based on the discounted rate structure that we are proposing for your rates for the legal services at this point, where we are discounting our rates, standard rates, basically 25 or 30%, depending on the nature of the work. Let me explain that for just a second. If it's general type of work that doesn't require, the unique sort of expertise, we typically discount that more for a couple of reasons. One is we don't do as much of it. Raymond can do a lot of that, or you can have other lawyers do that. The other part of it is where we don't discount quite as much on the project-specific work is because it does require some specialized expertise, and more importantly, maybe for you all, that's an area where you can capitalize those costs, or you can recover them out of the project budgets rather than some undefined revenue source. So it makes it a little bit easier for you to access that money. We have that 25-30% rate discount structure. You can see from the bottom chart that basically what we're asking to do is really only increase them, I would say roughly about half. Some of them are more, some of them are less, of what our overall structure of rate increases were. For example, my rate, basically half of the 52% increase. The Kurt Ashmos, who I mentioned earlier, our partner doing a lot of the procurement work, about half. Lori's is more than half, but at a lower rate, and Brian's kind of somewhat the same. Although as you get lower rate structures, it's hard to those percentages don't work out quite as high. But still, significant decreases, I think, that keep those rates at a fair level. Mr. Park, I think, asked a little bit last time about how we compare to other firms, and there's all sorts of surveys out there about lawyers and law firms and what they charge. One of them is a PricewaterhouseCoopers. That's probably the gold standard for at least for large law firms, and they break it down all sorts of different ways, but I think the one that's most relevant to you all is how we compare to our peers in Austin in terms of what we're doing. And you can see the average rates over there on the left side, and these are, I should have indicated those are for 2015. So we are, within the range, I guess, of those averages in terms of what our standard rates are, but when you add the discount in, we're considerably below, again, what those average rates would be for our peer firms in that market. Again, now we recognize that we are representing governmental entities. We're in a public sector. You all have limited resources, and we try to be sensitive to all that, which is why we offer these kind of structures. At some point, though, it has to be, economic for us, and it's hard to do when we haven't done anything since 2008. There's a footnote on that bottom one because I don't think that's a fair representation that Brian O'Reilly's rate is 305, not 536. I'm assuming that average came from a lot of more senior lawyers that had the same type of work, so I want to be fair about that. Really, it's probably that footnoted thing is probably the better representation of a discount that the effective discount of what we're doing. One last thing I want to mention is because Mr. Parker asked about it, and that is kind of what was our year-to-year type of increases. And it's not an easy question to answer because it varied from year to year. It varies from lawyer to lawyer. It varies from market to market, and that's why there's no easy answer to say we automatically increase or we typically increase our rates, 3, 5, 8% a year. It's not that easy. It's a lot of it's based on these studies and our peer groups and the size of firms that we are compared with and all. So unfortunately, I can't give you that sort of a number directly. So, but anyway, I've tried to provide other data that kind of puts this all in some sort of context. So.
If I could mention something too that I should have mentioned when we started this conversation as well, and Mr. Cassidy touched on it, we utilize Lock Lord for their expertise. So in instances where I have a question that is of a more general nature, we do utilize Norma Gordon here from a local law firm. When there are bond issuances, we use Paul Braden for his services as bond counsel. So really, in my opinion, the best utilization of Lock Lord is when it's a transportation-specific agreement that there's going to be a lot of back and forth with TxDOT because his law firm, as he mentioned, handles 7 of the 9 RMAs. They know all of the individuals that need to be involved in a conversation. If there's a hang-up, I can call Brian and he can get through whoever needs to get involved in the conversation to get those items resolved. So while the rate is high, I think there's access involved. There's certainly expertise, and there's a familiarity with the subject matter that I think is really invaluable in terms of when we're trying to get something done and how quickly we're trying to do it. Coupled with the fact that everything that we do, almost without exception, everything that we do is unique. We've not done a lot of straightforward agreements. We've not done a lot of straightforward funding approaches for these particular projects. And you see that when we're the first ones to do a TRZ backed issuance. We're the first ones to do a pass-through like was done with State Spur 601. A lot of the things that you're seeing us do are the first ofs, and it's been really extremely helpful to have a law firm that knows the people that need to be involved in those conversations. So again, I guess the point I'm trying to make is I don't call Brian for everything. I call them when we need it, when it's specialized, and when their expertise really comes in.
Any questions of Mr. Cassidy on that? I'd like to have, if you would transmit those slides to us via email, the final slides.
Certainly, I'll share that with you.
Ms. Henier?
Yes, ma'am. If you don't mind. First, I want to say I have great comfort knowing that you're here to represent the RMA. I'm just new to the board.
Thank you.
But I have researched you, and I see that your law firm is essentially the experts in this area, and I think that's tremendous. With that said, and being an attorney in the law firm in town, these rates are really, really high.
I understand.
And even with the discounted rate, which we appreciate it, they're still very high. So let me ask you this. How much legal work are you getting from the RMA? Could you give me an idea of what we paid you in 2014
Sure.
or what it is on a monthly basis?
I can, and let me see if I... So in 2014, I believe it was just over, and Raymond probably has the numbers, but mine show just over $300,000 is what we were paid. 2013 was $292,000, and let me emphasize that any of those Sometimes, I mean, for example, in 2012, it was less than $100,000. They tend to be project, you know, they tend to be focused around projects. So, for example, right now we're doing the streetcar procurement. We've got a lot of action, you know, that's a lot of activity for us. Once that's done, unless there's another procurement or something similar, you know, another project involving TxDOT or intricate financing issues, you know, again, it'll drop off. So it's peaks and valleys. But I mean, 300,000, I think, is probably 2010 was 393,000, but that was, again, I think that was probably Zaragoza, or excuse me, the Americas Interchange and a couple of other. I think there was another procurement during that year as well. So it's peaks and valleys around the projects.
And what percentage would you say, maybe this is a question for you, do they handle versus what you would send to Norman, who's also a great lawyer in town? Is it 50-50 or?
No, it's nowhere near that, right? So what they're handling, and I guess to touch on what he had said before, the 300,000 that's referred to, the majority of that is actually capitalized into the project. So they actually come from project funds. So what I probably should have done is broken out what comes out of projects to them and what comes from the RMA's general fund. And I haven't done that, but I can certainly do that.
Mr. Chase, I think it'd be helpful if you put together a small presentation for us on legal expenses and break them down by entity so that the board is aware of the percentage that Loch Lord and other councils perform for us, just as information and background for us.
Sure.
For our
And
next meeting.
so what you'll see is Loch Lord doing the majority of the work, Norman Gordon doing some of the work. Like, for example, we have him working on the streetcar, handling the utility work, that sort of thing. He handles all of the, and you'll see this before too long, he handles all of our, I'm evaluated by the board each year, so he handles all of that because obviously I shouldn't be involved in any of that. And then the only other area that's really involved is the work that I do on the negotiation of agreements. It doesn't really count as legal work. So those are the three. And then I'm sorry, the fourth one is Paul Braden. So I'll roll those four in there.
And let me say, for our standpoint, we fully encourage, you know, you or any other RMA to use local counsel when you can. And we understand the optics and we understand the economics of it all, and we try and add value where we can. And that's not, you know, Norman Gordon. I know Norman from way back. He's a great lawyer, and you know, you're smart to use him when you can. So we fully, you know, we fully encourage those types of relationships. We try not to be territorial about any of that sort of work. Raymond's great at managing it, and you've got the added benefit that he's a lawyer and can do a lot of what we end up doing for other RMAs that you don't have to do, that you can do in-house here. So.
Are there any other questions, Mr. Cassidy? Ms. Fenbach?
Are these rates consistent? You said that you represent 7 of the 9 RMAs across the state. Are these rates consistent with
yes. Yeah. Now they're not uniform because there's timing issues with all of them, but they are the structure that we are working to with all of them. So yes, yeah. And the discount structure is the same as well.
And is Pricewaterhouse, are they the firm that represents the remaining 2?
No, Pricewaterhouse just is an independent. It's an accounting firm that does this kind of national study on law firms. We're just probably one of the thousands that buy their work product in terms of what the studies, you know, what those studies show.
Do you know who the firm is that represents the other 2 and what the rates are?
Oh, the other RMAs.
The other 2 RMAs, yeah.
I believe Bracewell Giuliani represents the Hidalgo County RMA. I don't know what their rates are. And the other one is Sulphur River RMA, which is really not, I don't think they have any outside lawyers. We've helped them, you know, just of issues of common interest, all RMAs every once in a while, but they're not really actively pursuing a project, so I don't think they're doing anything. If they do, they're probably using local lawyers for the same reasons in the same instances that Raymond would.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Cassidy.
Thank you.
Mr. Tejas, do we need to take each item separately?
Yes, sir.
Okay. We'll entertain a motion on a board resolution authorizing executive director to execute a revised engagement letter with Loch Lord LLP law firm for the provision of legal services as requested from time to time by the CRRMA. I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I do have one question.
Ms. Hiner?
I think it's critical to have them on board, so I'm happy to support it, but I would like some information on being able to use other law firms locally and try to bring those costs down. Although 300 is fairly reasonable, these rates are pretty high. So if we could get that back up and still visit it, it'd be fine.
Thank you for your comment, Ms.
Absolutely.
Hiner. There being no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Any against? Motion passes. Okay, entertain a motion for a board resolution authorizing the executive director to execute a financial advisory agreement with First Southwest Company, LLC.
So on this item, I'll take you. Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to touch on this because this one's a little bit different. Last year, we actually went through a procurement for the selection of a financial advisor. And through that process, First Southwest was selected. So we had been negotiating an agreement. So what you have before you as backup is the actual proposed agreement. So I just want to touch on that. A little bit different than the Lock Lord deal.
Thank you, Mr. Tejas. We have a motion, and I believe we had a second. Any further discussion? There being none, all in favor? Any against? Motion passes, Mr. Tejas.
Great, thank you.
With that, I believe that concludes the regular agenda for our meeting today. So I will entertain a motion to end this meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
This May 7th meeting of the Community Regional Mobility Authority Board is over at 11:04 a.m. Thank you.